Krafton's Inzoi, a life simulation game once heralded as the Sims killer, burst onto the scene in early access nearly 4 months ago to much fanfare. But despite a strong start and nearly 1 million sales in its first week, over these last 4 months, Enzoy has essentially fallen off the face of the earth. So what happened to Inzoi, and what do some recent behind-the-scenes revelations tell us about the current state of the game as well as its future? In case you don't know, I actually spent like a year and a half covering Inzoi, and after its early access launch, my final thoughts on the game were that it was pretty yet boring. And despite claims from the Enzoy community that I am just a hater and a no-life under tween, you will notice they didn't say I was a lying under tween.
She's got a point.
Because it turns out a lot of other players and content creators have come to the same conclusion. The game is just boring. But some recent information has been revealed that kinda shines a light on Inzoi's lackluster launch, and it's actually super juicy, so stay tuned. But you know what else is juicy? The deals over on Instant Gaming, today's sponsor. Instant Gaming has a constantly revolving library of new and upcoming releases as well as cult classics. I think Instant Gaming is a really great choice for players who aren't comfortable going full Chips Ahoy, if you know what I mean, but also don't want to pay full price for games. As you guys know, I don't take sponsorships from game publishers or developers, and as a video game channel, that kinda limits your ability to get sponsors. So partnerships like this one with Instant Gaming are a real help. So feel free to shop on Instant Gaming using the link in the description, and thank you again to Instant Gaming for sponsoring this video. Have you guys heard about the Krafton lawsuit? At this point, it occupies 80% of my brain. The other 20%, I would say it's just butts. It turns out Krafton is in a crap ton of drama. They're currently being sued for upwards of $250 million for allegedly firing the creators of another game, Subnautica. The Subnautica creators allege that Krafton knowingly and willfully sabotaged the release of Subnautica 2 in order to avoid paying the development team the hefty bonus that was promised when Krafton purchased the studio back in 2021. Well, Enzoy is actually mentioned in the lawsuit, but before I get into telling you the details, let me make one thing really clear. It is very rare that you will ever find me siding on behalf of a multi-billion-dollar company. I'm clearly not a corporate fanboy. I will always support the little guy in every situation and put the burden of proof on these massive corporations to prove that they're not money-hungry, exploitative pieces of shit. Because why in the hell would I think otherwise? Right? But I know not everybody's the same way, because for some reason, every time I talk about Krafton and Inzoi, the fanboys get really upset. A few months ago, they even accused me of being paid by EA, which is like, get with the program. Where have you been the last 4 years that I've been roasting the hell out of EA? Anyway, my point is, I'm skeptical of every multi-billion-dollar company because again, why would I not believe that they're gonna do whatever it takes to milk the most money out of players and screw over their developers while they're at it? And this situation with Krafton is no exception. If Krafton is guilty of what the Subnautica creators are alleging, and by the way, what they're alleging is so egregious and downright evil on so many levels, if any of this is true, Krafton is the scum of the earth. So at one point, the Subnautica founders met with Krafton's chief global publishing officer to discuss the early access launch of Subnautica 2, because at this point, they were full steam ahead planning to release the game in 2025. And according to the lawsuit, this Krafton executive brought up the recent early access launch of Enzoy, which sold 1.1 million copies in its first week. The reason this executive brought this up is because they were essentially trying to tell the Subnautica creators that they could aim higher because their other games like Enzoy were smash hits according to them. But this next thing is the part we didn't know. In their meeting, the Krafton executive essentially acknowledged that Enzoy was an empty mess. They told the Subnautica founders that yes, Enzoy sold 1.1 million copies, but that's only despite having, and I quote, significantly less content and being less developed than Subnautica 2. So to reiterate, this executive, the one who oversaw the launch of Enzoy for Krafton, admitted that Enzoy was bare bones and less developed with less content than another game that, by the way, Krafton is now saying isn't ready for early access. Now, obviously, he admitted this privately, but thanks to this lawsuit, we're now privy to this information. And I don't think it's so much a smoking gun as it is an acknowledgement from Krafton that Enzoy is lackluster as hell. Look, anyone who's played the game is well aware of this by now, but it's funny that around the time Inzoi came out, if you even hinted, like on the Inzoi Discord or the Inzoi subreddit, that the game was empty and boring, the Inzoi fanboys would lose their shit. But going back to the Krafton executive statement, something's not really adding up here, because how can Subnautica 2 not be ready for early access, yet Inzoi, which is apparently less developed and has less content, was perfectly fine to release in early access? Make it make sense. But I think the more important question as it pertains to Inzoi is this: why was Krafton's standard for Inzoi so low? If Krafton knew that Inzoi was barely done, even for an early access game, why would they choose to release it when they did? Well, let me answer that for you. I reckon it's because Krafton did its research on the life simulation community, notably the Sims community, and they saw how they've let EA rip them off with mediocre DLC for over a decade. They saw that Sims players bought The Sims 4 at launch for, what was it, $50, $60, $70? And that game was quite empty as well. So I think they came to the conclusion that, hey, this community of players already has really low standards, so even though Inzoi isn't ready for early access launch, if we put it out now, they'll eat it up anyway. And that they did, to the tune of 1.1 million sales in its first week. Ladies and gentlemen, Krafton played all of us.
Yup.
They knew they could serve garbage to Sims players, and those players would not only eat it up with a smile on their face, they would also thank them for it. That is the smoking gun in all of this, because that shows how little respect Krafton has for you. They know your standards are subterranean. Not all of you, of course, but let's face it, a lot of Sims players are satisfied with mediocrity, and Krafton and the Inzoi team are well aware of this. You know, it's funny because, like, as I said, I've covered Enzoy for over a year at this point, and I can honestly say I kind of understand why Krafton did this. Some of these Enzoy fans exhibit the exact same patterns of behavior as Sims players. Even before the game was released, Enzoy fans were demonstrating some of the most outrageous toxic positivity I've ever seen. They were extremely defensive of the game. They became irate anytime someone criticized it. A lot of them still do, by the way. And today, they're the ones shouting, "It's early access," anytime someone criticizes the game. But the story doesn't end here, and this next piece of information from the Krafton lawsuit could potentially have far-reaching implications for Inzoi. In the lawsuit, the Subnautica founders recall a lunch meeting they had with Krafton's CEO, the head honcho. And during the meeting, they pressed him about Krafton's contractual obligation to pay that $250 million bonus, which for some reason Krafton had been stalling on. And this is how the CEO allegedly responded. He stated that paying the bonus would be, quote, disastrous financially and hugely embarrassing for Krafton. Now, why would he say that? Again, this $250 million was not a surprise to Krafton. It's something they had agreed to pay that's in the contract they signed when they purchased the development studio behind Subnautica back in 2021. So why would paying this bonus that they've known about and should have been planning for this whole time be embarrassing and disastrous financially for Krafton? I've read through this lawsuit and I've watched a lot of people cover this whole debacle, and this is the one thing that everybody kind of gets hung up on. I don't know about you guys, but my first thought when I read this was like, does Krafton not have enough money to pay this bonus? On paper, Krafton's an $11 billion company, but maybe they don't have that much liquid cash. Krafton has two majority owners, a South Korean billionaire and Tencent. In the past, Tencent actually expressed interest in buying all of Krafton. They wanted to acquire the company. However, this desire was squashed because Krafton's founder was on the board of this government committee in South Korea called the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And the whole goal of this committee is to improve Korea's economy by maintaining their financial and business interests. So selling a Korean company, aka Krafton, to a Chinese company, aka Tencent, would have been antithetical to this committee's whole agenda. And the founder was the chairman of this government committee at the time. And to make matters worse, Krafton can't really ask for any more funding from Tencent. The founder owns 14.8% and Tencent owns 13.8%, which means if Krafton is in trouble financially and needs more investment, they can't even go to their biggest investor to get more money unless they want to give up majority control. So with this information in mind, when we take another look at the Krafton CEO's statement, which to me ultimately hints that Krafton cannot afford the $250 million payout to the Subnautica development team, it kind of paints this dire picture for Krafton as a whole, and with it, Inzoi. If Krafton is having money problems, it could explain why they rushed Enzoy's release, and it might also give us some hints about the game's future. But what about Enzoy right now? Well, things aren't looking too good. The player count has plummeted, Enzoy content here on YouTube isn't getting any clicks. Why the hell am I even making this video? And the social media engagement for Enzoy is kinda non-existent. All around, there's very little interest for this game, but that's not to say the Enzoy team hasn't tried. Their marketing has been amazing, the promotional material is great, their trailers and ads have always been top-notch. And about a month before Enzoy's release, Krafton even established an entire creator program to get content creators to promote the game. Looking back, it's kind of like you guys did all this to bring people to a game that's, what, 20% complete? And on top of this, Enzoy has already had its fair share of controversies that have really put a dent in its image. We can't forget the whole AI controversy, which has been a hot button topic even prior to the game's release. The way they handled LGBT representation turned a lot of people off as well. And even the game's partnership with CurseForge has drawn ire from players. But for me, and I think the majority of gamers, what we really care about and what's most concerning is just the lack of fun gameplay. I haven't even touched Enzoy since April, and I've noticed most other content creators have either stopped playing it or, like I said, their Enzoy videos just aren't getting the engagement. That kind of sucks for them. Prior to this game's release, the people who had early access were getting hundreds of thousands of views. So the hype for this game was real, but Krafton fudged the execution. And now Enzoy videos are struggling to get 5,000 views. But this all kind of brings me back to that Krafton executive statement. This whole time, they knew that the game was lacking in content and gameplay, but they still put it out anyway. What on earth were they thinking? In a previous video, I questioned the direction that the Enzoy team was taking with this game because to me it appeared that they were more focused on making a cutesy dollhouse game where you can make pretty characters and play dress up instead of a legit life simulation game with actual depth of gameplay. I feel like my critique still holds up. They've even released a handful of updates for this game over the last few months, but to be honest, amidst the new hairs and furniture and some bug fixes, I'm still not seeing much. I've witnessed indie games release bigger updates than Enzoy has, and Enzoy has a team of what, 80 or 90 people, and they've barely introduced anything new to the game in the last 4 months outside of a few cosmetics. What the hell's going on over there? This is the kind of thing that makes me and others question the Enzoy team's direction. On top of that, I keep seeing these posts from Enzoy's lead producer asking players on social media for feedback and suggestions, but it's gotten to a point where it kind of feels like he's only asking because they don't know what the hell they're doing. By the way, if you guys haven't checked out the YouTube channel January Stories, he's been making some excellent videos about Enzoy, and one point he made about the Enzoy team's apparent lack of direction really resonated with me.
It drives me nuts to think that you need this much help. Like, you can't just try to think of something fun and then put that in and then workshop on that and then show those concepts and those ideas and then give feedback on that. Like, it's almost like you're starting from ground zero here. Anyways.
So what does all this tell us about the future of Enzoy? Well, I don't think this is a shocker for anyone, but I don't have a positive outlook for the game. I never really did, because even though I wanted the game to be great, babe, I was clocking those red flags from the jump. Literally a year ago, before the game was even released, I said in a video, Enzoy has a shiny exterior, but no depth. And by that I mean it's beautiful, but it's got no depth. And that is still my biggest concern with the game, and I think a lot of you feel the same way. I hope they can prove me wrong. I hope they can turn the game around. But based on what we've learned from this lawsuit, as well as previous Krafton games like the Callisto Protocol and Moonbreaker, Krafton does not have any patience for seeing its projects through. If a game is underperforming, they would rather shut it down completely and stop working on it than continue putting money into it. They have very lucrative IP with PUBG. They don't need to put themselves in more and more debt in order to make new IP. So I fear that if things don't improve drastically for Enzoy within the next year or so, they're gonna start with the layoffs. They're gonna stop marketing the game, and the updates are gonna come few and far between. And again, the reason I think this is simple. Krafton will not continue pumping money into a project that is not giving them a return. So the pressure's on for the Enzoy team, and these next few updates have to be really good. Apparently here in a few weeks they're releasing an update with a brand new world. Personally, I don't feel like they should be adding new content right now. I think they should be working on improving the core gameplay, but I guess their hope is that shiny new content will bring people back to the game. And yeah, maybe it will bring some people around, but the issue is I'm not sure they're gonna stay. Well, if that wasn't a metaphor for my dating life, thank God for those Costco-sized lotions. Am I right?
Crazy. You're looking so phenomenal. Hit me like a kick to my abdominal. I can't shake it. Tell me what you wanna do, baby. Everything you're sweating through, baby. Working like a wave, but you waving hello, kissing all my yesterdays. Goodbye, goodbye.